And okay, terrific. So Dr. Padmarani, don't want me to go back from the very beginning. I'm guessing it's perfectly okay for us to continue since we are getting into this approach. Okay, so I'm going to tell a few stories. I think that's the best way to learn about positive deviance. There's a foundational positive deviance story, which I first heard. All credit to my mentor, Jerry Sternan. It's the story of Mullah Nasiruddin. Mullah Nasiruddin or Maulana Nasiruddin or Nasiruddin Hoja, whatever you wish to call it, teacher, existed in Central Asia several hundred years ago. Of course, now he's become mythical. And there are stories of his wit and his wisdom. So in this particular story, which I think is a foundational positive deviance story, some of you may have heard it, Mullah Nasiruddin arrives on earth and he declares his profession to be one of a smuggler. And he begins by taking the microphone, to the top of a hilltop, let's say in a border area, and he challenges all the customs officials. And he says, I'm a smuggler, catch me if you can. Okay, so you can imagine all the border agents are rubbing their hands and are saying, oh yeah, we're going to catch you. So Mullah Nasiruddin, riding a donkey, comes to the border checkpoint and there's stuff loaded. The donkey's got a few other donkeys behind with more stuff loaded. And the customs official says, Mr. Nasiruddin, what do you have? And Nasiruddin says, check. And so, the customs official is trying to solve a problem. He's trying to figure out what Nasiruddin is smuggling. He checks, looks here and he looks there and he finds nothing of interest. So what does he do? Well, what can he do? He's got to let Nasiruddin go. The next day, Nasiruddin is back from the other side, riding a donkey with lots of stuff loaded on the donkey. More donkeys behind, more stuff loaded, comes to the border checkpoint. And this time, the customs official is like, I'm going to nail you, Nasiruddin. What do you have? And Nasiruddin says, look. And this time, the customs official really looks. Now he looks inside and over and left and right and turns the bags upside down and again finds nothing of interest. So what does he do? What can he do? He has to let Nasiruddin go. And you can imagine what happens the next day. The same thing. Nasiruddin is back and the customs official this time consults his manual and, goes deeply into this process of investigation, empties the baskets and puts on his X-ray glasses and administers the sniffing test and looks behind the donkey's ears and he finds nothing, again, of interest. So what does he do? What can he do? He's got to let Nasiruddin go. So in the harmony of keeping time, let's just say this happens day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade. And meanwhile, the customs official perhaps comes to Manipal Institute and, learns about customs checking, gets a bachelor's, master's, PhD, postdoctoral, degree in customs checking, becomes more expert. But yet he's unable to catch Nasiruddin in an act of wrongdoing. One day, of course, the customs official retires. And when he retires, Nasiruddin announces, he goes to the hilltop with his megaphone and he says, today I retire from smuggling. And they just happen to meet, maybe at the Manipal campus in the coffee shop. And, while they are standing in line, the customs official walks up to Nasiruddin and says, Nasiruddin, all my life, I have tried, I have studied, but I have been unable. So for all the sleepless nights that I've spent, please, would you please tell me what is it that you were smuggling? Donkeys, says Nasiruddin. All right. Okay, so the question to pose is, why was the customs official unable to see the donkeys? day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade. And, some people study this phenomena, those who deal with cognition. So, Herb Simon talks about bounded rationality. There are psychiatrists who talk about trained incapacity. And, we in the English language often say that if you're trained like a hammer, you begin to see the world as a nail. See, you even know that. So this is the folly of expertise, basically, that the answer that the customs official, the solution that the customs official was looking for, donkeys, were right there in front of him, day after day. Yeah, and donkeys are not small. They're right there. Big donkeys, not one donkey, more donkeys. But the customs official was unable to see the solution. It was hiding in plain sight. So the premise of the positive deviance approach is that solutions to very complex problems exist. They're right there, staring you in the face. We do not have the ability, the capability to see them. And that is because of our trained incapacities. I'm trained to be this and that, and so we miss a lot. So are you with me? So the positive deviance approach is an approach to complex problem solving where the solutions are hiding in plain sight. They're hiding. Yeah. So then, of course, the question becomes, how do I see the donkeys? Yeah. How do I see the solutions to very complex problems? Well, welcome to the positive deviance approach. How's it going so far? Is my voice coming through? Yes. You like the stories? Yes. Okay. More stories to come. Why not? So here's the question, no? How do social change scholars, practitioners find the donkeys? That is, solutions hiding in plain sight. Now, it may sound, as I give you some tools, it may sound like, oh, it is easy. But trying to reset our minds and the way we look at the world probably is the most difficult exercise. As I'm sure Professor Yanagihara, who's my guru, my sensei, there he is waving to us in Japan, knows, especially if you're an expert and you're trained, it's very hard for us to reset. It is very hard for us to do any kind of mental flips. So I'm going to give you some tools. I'm going to tell you a few stories so that you can see how you need to flip your way of thinking in order to find the donkeys. Yeah, sounds good? Dr. Anurekha, does that sound like a good idea? You can give me a thumbs up since I can see you visually. Okay, perfect. Good. I'm getting a thumbs up there. So with positive deviance, you need to do not one, not two, but at least 3 mental somersaults. Now, fortunately, if we had to do physical somersaults, at least I can speak for me and maybe even for my friend Sanjay, I think we may find it a little hard to do some cartwheels and do a triple somersault. Maybe we should leave that for gymnasts who compete in the Olympics. I don't know about Dr. Anurekha and Dr. Padmarani. Maybe they're very proficient in doing physical somersaults. But the challenge here is not a physical one, it's a mental one. And believe me, these are a little more difficult. Okay. So mental somersault 1. Again, I'm going to give you 3 stories, each for each of the mental flips. First story, do you recognize somebody whom you can locate in this picture? Anybody? You can open your microphone and tell me whom you see. You don't need to be shy.
Lincoln. All right.
All right. very right. Even though you see pixels and this picture was taken over 150 years ago, it is indeed Mr. Lincoln. And you may notice that he's a tall man. He was 6 feet, 5 inches tall, and he always wore this stovepipe hat. You know, I have my Texas hat, but he wore his stovepipe hat, which was 7 inches tall. So he was a 7-footer. And the story goes that in a battlefield during the US Civil War, a Union soldier walked up to him and saluted the commander-in-chief, the president, and pulled his hand out to shake the president's hand, and realized that his hand had to be sort of like this, because he wasn't as tall as Lincoln. And so he said, "Oh, Mr. President, you're tall. How tall are you?" Now, I see Dr. Maisa Khatib, perhaps joining us from Arizona State University. Dr. Khatib, may I ask you, how tall are you?
5 feet and 7 inches.
5 feet and 7 inches. And see, you even give us the units. Some people say I'm 5'7", no? And of course, you need to fill in the blanks. Or maybe we can ask my friend Sanjay, may I ask how tall are you, and see if you can tell me in centimeters and meters.
I'm 167 centimeters.
Okay, perfect. See, and if you had said 167, Sanjay, we would have said, okay, that's centimeters. No, we fill in the blanks. We have that under, or if you had said I'm 1.67, we would have said, okay, 1 meter, 67. Okay, so the question to Lincoln was what? The question was simply, Mr. President, you're tall, how tall are you? And his response was the following, and I want you to pay attention to it because it is that flip. So, Mr. President, how tall are you? And Lincoln, without batting an eyelid, says, "Son, like you, I'm tall enough that my feet reach the ground." Okay? Now, this is a very different way of thinking. He could have easily said, I'm 6 feet, 4 inches, tall, and then, end of story. But pay attention to what is being said. We are communicators, right? Son. He's not acting like a president. He's not acting like a commander-in-chief. He's not even acting like a tall man, even though he's apparently tall. That's the reason why the question was posed to him. He says, "Son, like you, I'm tall enough that my feet reach the ground." What Lincoln is saying, you can interpret this story in multiple ways, is if we look at the world in a way that most people look at the world, then you're going to miss something. And he's basically saying, perhaps to us, that wisdom to solve the problem may not just lie with the president or with the commander-in-chief or with a very tall person. The wisdom to solve the problem is distributed in the common ground. And it could be lurking, the solution, the donkeys could be lurking with unusual suspects, people on the ground whom you'd usually ignore. Are you with me? That's the first flip. You ready for the second flip? You can give me a thumbs up and I'll move. I'm waiting. Okay, I get a thumbs up. Whom do you recognize here?
Mother Teresa.
All right. And indeed, Mother Teresa. I see Isha. Very nice to see you. Isha, yeah.
Good morning.
Yeah, the second story, the second flip is a Mother Teresa story. Now, some of you know I had a long corresponding relationship with Mother Teresa, a reason why I have been collecting stories about her, no? And the story goes that she arrives in Washington, D.C. in 1974. And this is when Richard Nixon is in office. You know, there's Watergate, there's the Vietnam War, the State of the Union is a mess. And she arrives at Dulles Airport waiting to see her sisters from the Missionaries of Charity who were there to pick her up. But as she locates them in the arrival hall and walks towards them, there are at least 100 people with placards who intercept Mother Teresa. And they say, Mother Teresa, we are so happy you're here. Tomorrow we are having a march in Washington, and we would like for you to march with us. And Mother Teresa says, my child, what is this march about? And the representative says, tomorrow we are marching in Washington against the Vietnam War. And now Mother is silent. And so somebody says, so Mother, you would march with us, right? And Mother says, my child, if you're going to have a march in Washington against the Vietnam War, I am so sorry, my child. I will not be able to walk with you. And then they say, why not? And she says, my child, if you're going to have a march in Washington against the Vietnam War, I'm sorry. But my child, if you were to choose to have a march in Washington for peace, I will be the first to lead. Okay, I want you to pay attention to this. So the question we need to ask is, are being against the war and being for peace one and the same thing for Mother Teresa? And the answer is, well, for one, she says, I'm so sorry. And for the other, she says, I'll be the first to lead if you choose to march for peace. What Mother Teresa is telling us, you can interpret the story in multiple ways. The way I interpret the story, the reason why I'm sharing this story with you is because as problem solvers, and we are all problem solvers, what do we begin with? We begin by asking, what's the problem? And when you begin by asking, what's the problem? You begin by asking, what are you up against? So I'm against teenage pregnancy. I'm against racial discrimination. I'm against drinking and driving. You get the idea? And that's fine. Nothing wrong with it. Like nothing wrong in saying I'm 6 feet 4.5 inches tall. But here we are talking about a flip. What Mother Teresa is saying, if you ask what you are for, you will be at a different place. So one of my heroes, Otto Skama, action researcher at MIT, says we grow in the direction of the questions we ask. But how much attention do we pay to asking such questions? We are against this. We are against, because we are problem solvers. And if we are against this, then what are you looking at? You're looking at what are the gaps? What are the needs? What is not working? With whom? And 95% of the literature in social change and in public health, two areas that I know a little, is all about who's at the highest risk. We love the leading causes of mortality and morbidity because nothing wrong with it. Again, it's just a way we, like the customs official, we look in places where we are not looking for what's working. What are we for? What are the assets? Yeah, that is what Mother Teresa is asking us to look. So Lincoln is telling us wisdom is distributed. You can find the donkeys by identifying people who will know, whom you least expect to know. Mother Teresa is saying maybe begin with what you're for, what's working, as opposed to what's not working, what's the problem. So you've got two coordinates to see the donkeys, but you need a third one in order to put it together. So tell me if you're ready to get the third coordinate. I mean, we call it triangulation, right? In some ways.
Mahatma Gandhi.
Whom do you recognize? All right. Thank you, Nitisha. And Bapu, father.
Mahatma Gandhi.
And this is Bapu, of course, in his late 60s, maybe early 70s. If you saw pictures of him in London or in South Africa, he's wearing a three-piece suit and a stiff collar. He looks a little different now because now he's, growing his own food and weaving his own cloth. And there was a reason why he sort of did that. So now you can probably, what class of service is Bapu traveling in? If you look at the upper left corner, is he traveling first class by train? Or second? What do you see?
Probably third.
Third class.
Yeah. He's traveling third class. Yeah. Okay. So you can imagine, people of my grandparents' generation would say, Bapu, why do you travel third class? Right? And, we as a country can do better. Joe Biden, he's got a few more weeks to travel by Air Force One. Yeah, one. Jill Biden, her official title is First Lady first. When the chopper leaves the south lawn of the White House and flies to Andrews Air Force Base, its call sign is Marine One. One. Here, father of the travel third class. And Bapu's response, always the same, I travel third class because, as you know, there is no fourth class. You with me? I travel third class because, as you know, there is no fourth class. And, we know Bapu was deeply inspired by Ruskin, was deeply inspired by Tolstoy. And, the notion of unto this last. We have Robert Chambers. Some of us are inspired by his work, his two beautiful books, Putting the Last First or Putting the First Last. Yeah. And this is a very different kind of thinking. We are all very upwardly mobile socially. You, I, everybody. No? And here's Bapu, the father of the Indian nation, saying, I travel third class because there is no fourth class. Okay. So with these three stories, you get a way to at least locate where the donkeys are. And you're probably saying, how come? How do we put this together? So I'll give you an example. So this is the story that I heard 20 years ago. And of course, then I've studied it. It's very well documented. There's a special issue of Food and Nutrition Bulletin, a very highly ranked peer-reviewed journal, 2003, which has 16 articles, peer-reviewed articles on this work in Vietnam. This is the story that Jerry Sternin, when I met him 20 years ago, the founder of the Positive Deviance Approach, narrated to me. So the complex problem that they're trying to address nutrition. In the year 1990, when Jerry and his wife Monique arrived in Vietnam, 65% of the children in Vietnam were severely malnourished. It's a complex problem. How do you fix it? No? I mean, just what protein biscuits do? Well, okay, now you need a warehouse. Okay, now you need to, have people who are, oh my God, are protein biscuits being siphoned away? Oh, who's running it? Do you get the idea? Are people getting them who need it most? I mean, these are all the complexities of social change. So Jerry and Monique Sternin arrive in Vietnam the year 1990 to address the issue of malnutrition. And they begin by asking a flipped question, which has all these three somersaults. And the question was simply, and remember, we grow in the direction of the questions we ask. The question was simply, are there children under the age of 5 who come from the poorest of poor families, the 4th class, right? This is the Gandhi 4th class. Are there children under the age of 5, your demographic, whom you're trying to fix, who come from the poorest of poor rural households, the 4th class, and who are well-nourished? That's Mother Teresa, no? You're for nourishment. Are you with me? And basically the premise is that if there are children under the age of 5 who come from very, very poor rural households that are well-nourished, then these people have the solution. The answer is there. The donkeys are there. You don't need an expert. You with me? Okay, I hope you can connect the dots as we move on. And what they did, they, working in 4 communities initially, involved the villagers, involved the health workers. They went from house to house, and in 4 communities, they found 3,000 children roughly under the age of 5, and they plot them. They do sort of a participatory mapping. And if it's a household, they draw a little box. And if they have 3 children under the age of 5, then there are 3 dots inside that box. And if a child is well-nourished, it's a green dot. Child is malnourished, it's a red dot. And now you can see, as you can see, participatory sketching, mapping, they look at the data. And of course, if you're using the positive deviance approach and trying to answer that question, where do you begin? Do you begin with the red dots or the green? Okay, you begin with the green dots because you're interested in who is well-nourished. And, so 1,000 kids out of 3,000 are well-nourished. But the key is you're not interested in most of these well-nourished kids. You're only interested in those kids who come from the poorest of the poor families. So basically, you eliminate these green dots. Oh yeah, of course, this is a farmer who has 3 cows and 11 goats. And oh, of course, the children, oh, this is the child of a grocer, who has a village shop. And of course, no problem. You basically keep eliminating the green dots until you come to a dot which is green, and you say, who is this child? So, what, really? This child? Oh, the mother is really very poor. She's single mother. She has a very small piece of land. She has no cows or goats. She maybe has a chicken or 2. Impossible. Oh, but the data shows, because they weighed the kids and, took the circumference of their upper arm, they know that they are well-nourished. Out of 3,000 kids, and out of the 1,000 that were well-nourished, they found 18 kids, 1/8, that were green, who were supposed to be red. And of course, you call them the positive deviants. So here's your definition of positive deviance. They're deviants because they are not the norm. Basically, it's a deviation from the norm. And they call them positive because they've solved the problem. 18 kids out of 3,000. It's a rounding error, but they do exist. They're real. And now you can go back to the story of the smuggler, and you can say, the problem that I'm trying to solve, malnutrition, the answer is there, and the answer lies with these 18 children, because they shouldn't be well-nourished. And if they have solved the problem in their own context with all the odds stacked against them, then whatever they must be doing must be accessible to all. That's a good premise. Are you with me so far? Yes? So anyway, long story short, now you have to figure out what the heck are they doing that is uncommon. And you can underline this word uncommon, because they must be doing something which is different. That's the innovation, right? I mean, I have an interest in innovation, but this is not an innovation that's coming from the outside. Somebody is engaging in a practice innovation. They're practicing, they're doing something which is different. And so they, cut a long story short, they go from, one household to the other, observing, looking, what are they doing different? They come back and they say, oh, you wouldn't believe what this family is doing. What is this family doing? This family, oh, you wouldn't believe. The mother takes the greens of sweet potato plants, shakarkandi ke patte, greens of sweet potato plants, and adds them to the pho or to the rice. Oh, isn't that customary practice? No, it is not, because people eat the sweet potato. The greens are thrown away. Oh, okay, so it's an uncommon practice. Yes, it is an uncommon practice. Oh, so what does the greens of sweet potato have? Now you can put on your expert hat and you can say, oh, it has beta carotene, it has vitamin A, it has, calcium, it has magnesium, it has all the minerals that we give our children, in using droppers. Oh, the wisdom to solve the problem and the resources to solve the problem are right here. But nobody else does it. So the donkeys have been here. They've been coming and going. We just haven't had the eyes to see them. Are you with me? Then some other, researchers along with village teams come and they say, you wouldn't believe what this mother does. Oh, what does this mother do? This mother feeds the child 4 meals. Okay, what's uncommon about that? Oh, the norm is 2.5 meals. Oh, so she feeds them more food. They say, no. The interesting thing is it's the same amount of food, but she takes the same portions and breaks them down into smaller portions. Oh, what would that do? Now you can put on your expert's hat and you'd say, if children have little stomachs, so more frequent feedings, smaller portions lead to better assimilation. Oh, the wisdom to solve the problem is here. It's not commonly practiced. Most children get 2 meals, 2.5 meals. If you took the same amount of food and broke it up, you get the idea. Then another uncommon practice. Oh, you wouldn't believe what this mother does. What does this mother do? She takes the shrimps and crabs, the teeny tiny shrimps and crabs and shellfish and snails from the rice fields and takes them home, removes the crust, because these are crustaceans, and takes the little bit of pulp and adds them to the pho, to the rice. Oh my God. Wow, that's protein. And then you say, why don't others do it? Because, well, the idea is that children cannot handle crustaceans, which is right. They cannot. But the mother can do it for them. And also the perception is that if you need to eat shrimps and crabs and shellfish and snails, not the teeny tiny ones, you get them from the river or from the sea. Oh my God, the wisdom to solve the problem and the resources to solve the problem are right there. Are you with me? Okay. So what uncommon practices were discovered? The greens of sweet potato plants, little teeny tiny shrimps and crabs. And of course, the key is that these resources were accessible to all. Oh, another thing was active feeding. In Vietnam, the common practice was that if a children sat up, and because the mother was busy, you let the children, you put a bowl in front and they eat some and drop some and waste some and leave some. Some mothers were engaging in active feeding. The PD mothers were engaging in active feeding. And what does that do? Well, this uncommon practice makes sure that even the last morsel goes in. And also, of course, you can talk about the notion of bonding and what that does do for a child in terms of, their appetite and so on. long story short, you can read this special issue of Food and Nutrition Bulletin, volume 23, 4. Over a 10-year period, over a 7-year period, Vietnam solved its malnutrition problem. Okay? So this is the foundational story of positive deviance. And let me now give you very quickly, Professor Padma, do I have another 5 minutes or should I try to close up?
You have 5 minutes.
Okay, let's see if I can. So this is what the positive deviance approach is, no? Basically, the premise is there always exist ordinary people who have found better solutions to complex social problems against all odds. I mean, there is always a distribution. We know that. Some people do better, some people don't, with respect to problem solving. So I'll just give you a small example from here. One of my students is a diabetic, and she was very interested in what you can call as the epidemic of diabetes here on the US-Mexico border. And she took a positive deviance class with me and then ended up doing a master's thesis and then eventually a PhD. And the question she asked, we grow in the direction of the questions we ask, was quite simply, are there people in El Paso County who come from poor families, who don't have medical insurance, who have a diagnosis of diabetes, and who have managed their diabetes well, indicated by their last 2 scores of A1C, which tells you how well you're managing your diabetes, and who are doing this with no medication or maybe 500 milligrams of metformin, that's it. Now, this is again a very improbable, implausible, almost an impossible question. Because who would be poor, not have medical insurance, have a diagnosis, and and have managed it well and with no medication? Impossible. Well, she found a way to collect data. Out of 800 people who had a diagnosis of diabetes, who fit this criteria, she found 1%, who had managed their diabetes well with all these odds. No? And then, of course, the question is, what is uncommon? And you'd be surprised. What she found that was uncommon, and there were quite a few things, but I'll just give you one, was when these people got their diagnosis of diabetes, they disclosed it right away to their family members and friends. And then you say, what? That's the uncommon practice? Yeah, because you can imagine, if you get a diagnosis of diabetes, do you think you're going to get on a megaphone and say, I have diabetes, I have diabetes, I have diabetes? How many of us have diabetes or issues, which are so stigmatized that we hold them close to our chest? And then, of course, you probe what happens. What does self-disclosure do? Oh, of course, when you disclose this, one-time disclosure, now there is an ethic of care around you. Now your daughter, your granddaughter, your friends, they're dropping by, taking you out for long walks. When you are about to dig into that big slice of cake, your granddaughter says, no, no, papi. All she has to do is just wag her finger. So the best prescription our work found that a doctor could write is, please self-disclose. Or we found some doctors, whenever there was a diagnosis of diabetes, they counseled the whole family at once, whomever the patient wanted to bring. Oh my God. And here we are trying to fix problems in this very Newtonian way. This is the problem. Okay, we are against this, so you should do this and this and this. Self-disclosure, which is a small communicative act. That's the reason why I'm talking about positive deviance in a forum of communicators. A small communicative act creates the rippling conditions for change because we are interconnected. And it's understandable because that's what complex problems are. They are interconnected. So self-disclosure creates the conditions for other rippling interactions that are more open. An ethic of care and support arises. I think I'm going to skip this, but if in question, we've applied this to, my colleagues have applied this approach to address the issue of violent acts conducted by inmates in maximum security prisons in Denmark. Big problem. And then, of course, you ask the question, are there some guards who have figured out a way to thrive, who have no violent acts committed against them? And what is it that they do? And, again, there's some little uncommon behaviors. Decline in why, when we did this work, my colleagues Lars Thusen and Mats did this work. Declined by 40% in 1 year. We've done this work using the positive deviance approach. It was actually the first study of positive deviance in Netherlands, where we were looking at the assimilation of immigrant kids. Netherlands, has had a lot of kids and families come in from different parts of the world. And usually these kids don't do very well psychologically because, the language, the acculturation, they live in, you can call them sort of immigrant communities or ghettos. So we asked the question, are there some students who are immigrants who are doing phenomenally? And of course, we found some very simple things that were happening there. The donkeys, right? They were hiding in plain sight. So in summary, and this is Jerry Sternin, he always, when you were sitting from across him, whenever you had an idea, he'd say, flip it, flip it, flip it. No? So why positive deviance? Let's come back to it because it focuses on what's working. It basically believes that solutions exist with ordinary common people. You don't have to wait because somebody's already solved the problem. You don't need to wait years to implement it. You can begin now. And you can begin with very few resources because the hand feeding or the adding of shrimps and crabs or the adding of sweet potato greens. And what's so special about sweet potato greens? You can add carrot greens and turnip greens and this greens and that greens, right? I mean, the ideas can scale, but the solutions come from within and so on. So why not end with Robert Frost? Jerry loved this couplet. We as experts, who are so full of ourselves, dance around the ring and suppose, and that's our task. That's how we sound expertly. We dance around the ring and suppose the truth sits in the middle and knows. So thank you very much for giving me an opportunity, AMIC and Manipal Institute of Communication, and thanks to all of you who have joined us in their mornings, afternoons, and evenings for this presentation. I do think there is much that communicators, given all these little elements, are communicative because they don't cost too much, because it has to be a communicative practice which makes the difference. So whatever you'd like to do next, Professor, over to you.
Yeah, so can we have a few questions, Professor, from the audience? Yeah, you can unmute, put a thumbs up, unmute your mic and ask a few questions.
Now, Professor Padmarani, may I suggest we may take a few questions orally, but we may not be able to take them all. So if you have a question or if you have a comment, if you have an opinion, if you have an aha moment, please go ahead and use the chat so that this way at least we get your input. And, then Dr. Padmarani, you can coordinate the Q&A. But I want to invite everybody to, to participate, and we can do it through chat.
Yeah, Dr. Anurekha, you can go ahead. I think I saw your hands being raised.
Yes. Hello, Professor.
Hello.
Yeah, here is fan moment here. I'm a huge fan of you, fan of your thoughts, fan of your books, and I'm kind of following certain level of deviance, positive deviance. My question to you is, see, in the process, see, when we grow up the ladder, see, I'm asking the capacity of a leadership. When you grow up in the ladder and when you wanted to do things little bit odd or whatever, which we think is a solution, possible solution to whatever situation or context, we kind of keep liberating ourselves and breaking the structures. Yeah. But what happens is, to certain level, I could do it. Beyond that, I couldn't experiment and I'm getting stuck. What should I do when it is out of my range in terms of breaking the structures?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me answer it with a story that I just heard an hour ago. So we all know Jeff Bezos. We know that name. The founder of Amazon is one of the richest people, So in this interview today, it was being conducted by the New York Times. He was asked, so Mr. Bezos, how does it feel you're one of the richest men? 200 billion is his worth, no? And he said the question of who's in the Forbes list of billionaires, and I may be on top, is not a very useful question. The question to ask is, how many people has Amazon made wealthy? It's not about how much wealth I have generated. I only have 200 billion. The whole company is worth 3 trillion, which basically means that a lot of people have shareholders become wealthy. And of course, they've become wealthy because they must provide a service which people are using. I don't know how many of us use Amazon, but I do, and my kids do, and I'm a Prime member, and I love the customer service. Yeah. Okay, so what does it have to do with your question, Dr. Anurekha? I think our task, of course, you can always ask yourself, what is it that I can do to be a positive deviant? What is it that I can do as a leader to experiment? I think a more valuable question or more expansive question is, how do I create the conditions for others to lead? And this is what the positive deviance approach is, right? You're not looking for deviance within you. You're working with the community for them to figure out who among them in a hidden way is doing things which adds value. So that's one way of answering your question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, we can have the second question. Yeah, I think.
Professor Sanjay, are you asking a question? I'm sorry, I'm not looking at chat. But
yeah, he has typed a question. Maybe I could read it out aloud.
Yeah.
We asked a number of questions keeping modernization of a particular kind in mind. Would we have asked a Gandhian approach?
So the question is, what is there value in the Gandhian approach, or are you making a statement? I'm basically saying there is so much value and power in looking at the world in a different way, in a way that you ask questions where you are looking for what has worked with the most vulnerable, with the most marginalized, with those who are silenced, with those who don't have a voice. which is a very Gandhian way, right? I mean, Salt March, as we know, was in response to, what is it that I can do so that I can carry the 350 million Indians with me, the ones who toil in the field. And his argument to Lord Irwin was what? Dear brother Irwin, I request you, I beg you to repeal this tax on salt. Because we know the British government, much like they had, tax on tea here in the US, that's the reason why we had the Boston Tea Party when there were 13 colonies of the British Crown here in the United States. The simple question was, brother, would you, as the viceroy, repeal this tax on salt? Why? And he made a legal argument, actually. He said, poor people need more salt than the rich. They do, because they work in the fields, they sweat more. And he said, by taxing salt, you put a differential burden on the poorest of the poor. Right? So I asked, the British sense of justice, moral justice, I appeal to that. And of course, what did Irwin say? Salt, he's going to take us on salt. And then, of course, came Dundee. And then, of course, the Rajgopalachari and others are doing there were thousands of marches to India's coast. And when people in India on the seacoast began to boil seawater in their kettles, the foundations of the British Empire began to shake. So I don't know, I couldn't grasp Sanjay's question, but the PD approach is very much
Arvind, can I chip in here?
Yeah, please.
See, Arvind, I was more looking at the framework of the dominant paradigm and innovations, which was very popular in the early 1960s and what we call as the Nehruvian approach. Now, one of the critiques that you have come across and you also talked about it is that we forgot to even recognize the structural limitations of our society in pushing for innovation, which was driven entirely by a push for mass media development in countries like ours. So I have a larger philosophical question where technology precedes even the solution, giving us little opportunity for looking at the green potato, the greens, etc. That is the negative deviance that we have lost many generations ago, is my observation. Thank you.
Yeah, totally, Sanjay. And I'm saying is by cultivating, and cultivation is a good word to use, a mindset, by talking about it, teaching about it, in a sea of this thinking of modernization, experts, outside in innovation, evidence-based innovations, evidence-based practice, PD flips everything. And it is very hard. You're absolutely right. Because we get in the way. We, the educated, get in the way. Because we say, let me tell you, whereas PD is all about, I know nothing. I only know that there are some people who, given the problem, have figured out a better way. And it is a practice variation. So PD is practice-based evidence as opposed to evidence-based practice, right? So yeah, Sanjay, that's the challenge. I think that's the reason why I'm the only one who's teaching this course. I mean, this is not because I'm special, but, I would hope that our students, if we are a community of learners, we would not, say, okay, modernization, we are all corrupted, we cannot do anything. But it is a sense of agency. It is possible. It is possible. The donkeys are there. And that's the hope. And, maybe I don't know what better philosophy than hope there could be, in some ways, because I hope the whole enterprise of philosophy is hope and well-being and, ethics and concern for the others. So for me, the PD framework and its practice is a deep sense of agency and a deep sense of belief in the potentiality that lies but which is hidden.
Thanks, Arvind.
Yep.
We'll continue the dialogue.
Yeah, totally.
So can we have one last question?
And Dr. Padma, I'd love to get a chat transcript so I can
Yes.
see the questions. And if you want, I'll be very happy to respond to some of them, in a sort of a general way. And if you wish to share it with the participants, at least, in all fairness to those who have posed the question that they should, yeah.
I think we have one question here in the chat box, which I think you can, how can we reach people specifically, those people not aware of the changes of our society? This is from Daniel Romero.
How can we reach people who are
not aware of the changes of our society?
Maybe invite Daniel to say more about the question. I'm a little unclear.
Yeah, Daniel, please unmute yourself and you can ask the question.
And that is because, I want to be respectful of the question and not assume. So please, Daniel.
Since Daniel is not responding, Arvind, do I see the question as a kind of a transmission model of wanting to reach out to people who don't even recognize the changes around them? I mean, do I see that as a hint? I don't know. Daniel can come in, but looking at the question, I was reaching out to the people who are not aware of the changes around them. I felt that reaching out was a way of communicating a message or transferring a message. I thought that was probably implied.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Sanjay, for stepping in. So maybe I'll just say this, that positive deviance is not about telling people what to do. Some of the images that you saw, so it's not about transmission. In fact, it differs from other change processes in that right from day one, it believes in involving the community. The community has to decide in some ways, and this is a long process. And that's the reason why positive deviance is sort of simple in terms of mental somersaults and understanding, but rather difficult to do because we get in the way. And so it involves a long process, first of being invited. And you're saying, what does that mean? So one of the things I learned from Jerry is you don't just go and say, I've got PD and, this is gonna, no. If you're invited into a conversation where somebody's trying to address something, you say, well, maybe there's a different way of looking at it, right? You grow in the direction of the questions you ask. So, you may begin to ask different questions. Are you telling me that everybody is malnourished or everybody is, we often make these statements, we've got a big problem. Everybody does this. And then it's good to pause and say, are you sure? Isn't there somebody who you think who comes from a poor, who's figured this out, who faces the highest odds, who's figured this out? For instance, I was invited by the state of Oklahoma, right? You read that, Professor Padmarani. And they said, we've got a problem. What's the problem? The problem is we are the 50th ranked state in the US out of 50 states. That's a problem, right? We are the 50th ranked state in how we resolve cases where we rehabilitate those who have a mental illness. And rehabilitation here means finding them employment and they being in employment that's commensurate with their skills while they manage their psychological condition. And so, are they hopeless? Well, you could say so. The data certainly shows so. And, so simple questions like, so how many case counselors do you have in the state of Oklahoma case workers? Oh, we have about 300. So I say, are they all useless? And are they all performing at, the 50th or, the last 5 percentile range? Or are there some caseworkers who are closing cases, who are rehabilitated? And of course, we did a PD inquiry and we found 9. But how did we do the PD inquiry? The state of Oklahoma said we have a problem. Oh, okay, let's have a conversation. Oh, okay. Are there some case counselors who work in difficult geographies? So you involve the people so that they themselves can. I will not be able to identify as a researcher or as somebody who knows a little bit about PD that the uncommon practice is adding the greens of sweet potato plants. Only the community members will know. So PD by its very definition, if we interpret Daniel's question the way it is, and thank you, Sanjay, is it's completely the obverse of this transmission mentality. And, so one needs to be an expert in non-expertise, right? And you go in, if you're invited, and you work with, it's sort of like, okay, maybe I'll summarize it. Jerry always quoted Confucius. And sometimes he would, quote Tao, the Tao Te Ching. And basically he'd say, if you want to be a social change worker, go to the people, sit with them, eat with them, get to know them, learn from them. Maybe you can have a conversation about where they want to go. And, you work with what you have. You accompany them, wherever they wish to go. But when they reach their destination, they have to say, we did it ourselves. And that is really the essence of the PD approach. It begins with the premise, I don't know, but there is wisdom here in the community, in the common ground, and they know. So I'm sorry if we've taken Daniel's question and interpreted it in our intellectual ways, but hopefully this is useful.
Yeah, okay. We'll now end this session. Can I, ask Ramon, the AMIC Secretary General, to say a few words?
Thank you,
Ramon,
Dr.
how wonderful to see you. I thought you were not going to be on this call.
I almost did not make it. My apologies. I was asked by our Ministry of Higher Education to give an orientation to 16 development communication schools here in Southern Philippines in Mindanao.
Oh, lovely.
And listening to Dr. Arvind and also his papers, I'm more convinced that PD should be shared with development communication schools in the Philippines and elsewhere. Why? Because PD may yet enhance or enrich our understanding of what development communication is. So thank you very much, Dr. Arvind Singhal, for this very, very important lecture, which will be the start of a series of lectures by AMIC Asia Communication Awardees. I would like to thank, of course, our colleagues from MIC Mahe for organizing this event. Thank you very much, Dr. Padmarani and colleagues from Mahe. I think my colleague Mopet Varles mentioned about forthcoming events. We've asked Cherian George, who was our 2024 winner laureate, to give a talk in January or February, depending on her availability. And Cherian will be discussing journalism issues. And there are two very interesting forums that we are organizing for first quarter of 2025. The first one is the political dimensions of digital transformation in Asian media. What do we mean by this? We all know that a lot of, in fact, all media entities are now migrating to the digital platform. But there are many cases, there are many situations wherein their transformation to digital platforms is necessary because of political pressures, political problems, and political dynamics. And we would like to know more about their lessons and experiences. The second one is, as we all know, 2024 is election year, super election year worldwide. And as Mopet may have mentioned, 20 countries in Asia are having or had their elections this year. So we would like to know from selected countries their experiences in the use of AI and social media in elections, so that we could put together very useful case studies, documents on lessons and experiences, what to do, what not to do in the use of AI and social media. So we'll be very busy next year. Might take this opportunity also to mention our AMIC representative, aside from Dr. Padmarani. I see Dr. Chandra Banu. Hi, Chandra. He has been helping me with our next forums next year. And of course, I saw my idol, Dr. Sanjay. Hello, sir. Thank you very much for joining us. We're very honored by your presence. So again, thank you very much, dear colleagues. I hope that you will continue to participate in future AMIC events. I hope you will also enroll as AMIC individual and institutional members in the next year. Among others, by the way, so sorry, I'm aside from institutional and individual members having access to the two AMIC journals, Asian Journal of Communication and Media Asia, our publisher, Routledge, Taylor and Francis, has promised that AMIC members will have access to two more online journals. So 4 journals in all for institutional and individual members. So wow. And of course, for our institutional members and individual members, we have started sharing open access books. I think the first one we shared 56 books. Am I correct, Mopet? 56 open access books, which we shared, we emailed to our members. And soon we will share the link to 65 movies and series related to freedom of expression, press freedom, freedom of information, journalism issues, etc., etc. Please help us, because many of these learning resources are from the West. Please help us if you have materials, open access materials, and if you want to share them with our colleagues from Asia, from the South, please email them to us. We will collect them and share them with our colleagues. By the way, Dr. Arvind, We have expanded Asia to include colleagues from Central Asia, North Asia, and West Asia. Yes, our colleagues from Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, etc. have joined us in previous events. So we're expanding our footprint. Again, to dear AMIC colleagues who have joined us today, thank you very, very much to our keynote speaker, Dr. Arvind Singhal, to our MIC Mahe family. I'm a member of the MIC Mahe family, by the way. Thank you for hosting us. Over to you, Dr. Padma.
Yeah, so I think I would just thank everybody for joining us, and especially Professor Arvind Singhal for giving a very interesting and stimulating thought talk today. And I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of food for thought for discussions in the coming weeks. And like you said, I think for some time, if people want to stay around and have an informal session, we can have, because the link is functional for some more time. Yeah.
Okay, I'm here, so we can formally close this. Again, thank you all. Thank you, Ramon. Thank you, Dr. Padmarani. And but I'll stay on for the next 10-15 minutes. Thank you for keeping the link on. If you need to sign off, please do. But if you want to stay and have a chit chat, I'm here.
So I'll stop the recording so that we can,
Perfect.
Yeah.
Arvind, can I start with something that I have in mind? Arvind,
Please.
are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Please.
Arvind, one of the challenges